Hi, I'm Antonio Mora. And the Democratic nomination for president goes to nobody. Unless you're at least 80, or you're confusing the TV shows West Wing or Veep with reality, you can't remember the last time a primary season came up empty with no candidate having a majority of pledged delegates by the time a party's convention opened in the summer before a presidential election. The U.S. has not seen a contested political party convention where delegates failed to choose a nominee in the first round of voting since decades before the current primary election process was fully in place. The last conventions that needed more than one round of votes were in 1952, when Democrats nominated Adlai Stevenson on the third ballot, while Republicans nominated Dwight D. Eisenhower after he fell just 9 votes short in the first round. At this early stage in the game, the frontrunner is unquestionably Bernie Sanders. He took the popular vote in both Iowa and New Hampshire, leads in the 3 most recent national polls, and has the funding to compete for the rest of the primary season. However, he's a weak frontrunner, receiving far fewer votes in New Hampshire than he did in 2016. And barring an upset victory over Joe Biden in the next 2 contests and some sort of ensuing bandwagon effect in his favor, the odds are that he will not reach a majority of delegates by the first week in June, which is when the primary season ends. Why? The Democratic field is still large. Despite the poor performances by Biden and Elizabeth Warren in Iowa and New Hampshire, they still have substantial national support in the polls. Plus, the organization and the money to keep competing, at least for now. Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar are not as well positioned in the national polls, nor do they have strong cross-country organizations, but they have momentum following their success in the early voting states. And then there is the Mike Bloomberg factor. The former New York City mayor is using his billions to explode onto the national political scene. Polls show he will be a force to be reckoned with when he starts competing in primaries on Super Tuesday, March 3rd. Of course, people said the same thing about Donald Trump in 2016 that I'm arguing about Bernie now. And there are similarities, including how both he and Sanders are unpopular with their respective parties' establishments. But the differences are more significant. Trump's big-name opponents started dropping like flies more quickly than what we are likely to see with the larger-than-usual number of Democratic candidates this year who are prepared to go deep into the season, if not all the way to the convention in Milwaukee in July. And as opposed to the 2016 Republicans, Democrats don't have any winner-take-all primaries, so lots of candidates could have lots of delegates, which would make achieving a clear majority an especially tough task. That said, the Democrats have strong incentives to have a presumptive nominee as early as possible. They know they need to focus on defeating Trump, not each other. A protracted battle all the way to the convention would mean negative publicity, party disunity, and bickering among the remaining candidates, all of which would be music to Trump's ears. Even so, the urge to have a standard bearer will be tempered by the Democratic Party's establishment, which will resist coalescing around Bernie Sanders if he remains the frontrunner. They have not forgotten the landslide loss when the party moved left in 1972 when George McGovern was the nominee. The establishment will fight to keep other candidates viable. And unless one of them breaks out and takes control of the race, we could very well get to July 13th in Milwaukee without knowing who the Democrats' candidate is. What happens then? When no candidate has a majority of pledged delegates and the first round of voting fails to produce a nominee, you end up with a free-for-all where political horse trading becomes the name of the game. Why? Regular delegates who were pledged to a particular candidate are released and then can vote for whomever they want. Also, at that stage, the so-called superdelegates come into play. Who are they? Not the Democratic Party's base. In fact, they personify the party's establishment. Elected members of the DNC, Democratic governors, Democratic members of the House and Senate, and a couple of dozen of distinguished party leaders. Their average age is 60, and they could vote for anyone they please. Broadly speaking, they are just the kind of Democrats who would be least likely to choose Bernie. Unless he barely missed a majority in the first round, no matter how loudly the base might be feeling the burn, they will compromise around a more moderate candidate. Concluding, I wouldn't bet my house that the Democrats will face a contested convention, even though that is getting increasingly likely. But I would gamble everything I've got that if there is a contested convention, Bernie Sanders will not be the nominee.